Hey there, food lovers! Today we're diving into a fascinating and challenging period in history that shaped the way people approached food and cooking. Imagine a time when the cupboards were bare and the shelves were empty, with not a can of beans or a loaf of bread in sight. The only thing filling the air was the sound of rumbling stomachs, a constant reminder of the scarcity that defined daily life. No, it's not an episode of Somebody Feed Phil in a remote corner of the world. We're talking about the Great Depression, a period in history when folks had to get mighty creative to keep food on the table. The Great Depression, which kicked off in 1929, hit America like a bad stock market crash hard and fast. It was a time when the economy crumbled and the impact was felt in every household. The stock market crash of October 1929 marked the beginning of this economic downturn, leading to widespread financial panic and uncertainty. Businesses closed, jobs vanished, and folks found themselves struggling to make ends meet. Unemployment rates soared, and many families faced the harsh reality of poverty. For many, putting food on the table became a daily challenge, a constant game of ingenuity and resilience. Families had to make do with what little they had, often relying on simple, inexpensive ingredients. But even in the face of hardship, the human spirit, much like a good sourdough starter, finds a way to rise. People came together, sharing recipes and tips on how to stretch their food supplies. People learned to stretch every last crumb, transforming scarcity into resourcefulness. They made meals out of scraps and leftovers, ensuring nothing went to waste. They turned to the land, foraging for wild edibles that most folks today wouldn't know from a blade of grass. Dandelions, wild berries, and even acorns became valuable food sources. Let's take a trip back in time and rediscover these forgotten foods that helped a generation survive. These foods not only nourished bodies, but also brought communities together. You might be surprised at what you find and maybe even inspired to add a little Depression-era ingenuity to your own kitchen. From creative cooking techniques to resourceful recipes, there's much we can learn from this resilient generation. So let's explore the culinary legacy of the Great Depression and see how it continues to influence our kitchens today. Now, I'm no historian, but I can tell you that the Great Depression was no picnic. It was a time when the world seemed to be turned upside down and the comforts of daily life were stripped away. People were thrust into a harsh reality where survival became the primary focus. Imagine losing your job, your savings, maybe even your home. The security that many had taken for granted vanished almost overnight. Unemployment rates soared and breadlines became a common sight in cities and towns across the country. People were struggling to feed their families, and grocery stores weren't exactly overflowing with affordable options. Shelves that were once stocked with a variety of goods now stood empty. And the prices of basic necessities skyrocketed, making it difficult for the average person to afford even the simplest of meals. Meat was a luxury, and fresh produce was hard to come by, especially for those living in cities. The urban environment posed its own set of challenges, with limited space for growing food and a higher cost of living that made it even harder to make ends meet. Folks had to make do with staples like flour, sugar, and lard ingredients that, while filling, weren't exactly bursting with flavor. These basic items became the foundation of many meals, and people had to get creative to make them stretch as far as possible. But here's the thing about us humans. We're a resourceful bunch, especially when it comes to food. When faced with adversity, we find ways to adapt and overcome. The kitchen became a place of innovation where simple ingredients were transformed into nourishing meals through sheer ingenuity. When times get tough, we get cooking. Families gathered around the stove, sharing recipes and tips on how to make the most of what little they had. It was a time of community and collaboration where everyone pitched in to help one another. And during the Depression, that meant looking beyond the pantry and into the fields, forests, and even their own backyards. People turned to nature for sustenance, foraging for wild plants and herbs that could be used to supplement their diets. That's where our forgotten foods come in. These weren't fancy ingredients, they were wild plants, weeds even, that grew in abundance and, most importantly, were free for the taking. Dandelions, nettles, and other wild greens became valuable sources of nutrition. These wild edibles were often overlooked in times of plenty, but during the Great Depression they became essential. People learned to identify and harvest these plants, incorporating them into their meals in creative ways. It was a return to a simpler, more self-sufficient way of life. Next time you're feeling down on your luck, remember the spirit of the Great Depression. It's a reminder that even in the toughest of times, there's always a reason to keep your chin up and your spoon ready. The resilience and resourcefulness of those who lived through that era serve as an inspiration to us all. It's a reminder that even in the toughest of times, there's always a reason to keep your chin up and your spoon ready. The human spirit is incredibly resilient, and our ability to adapt and persevere is what has carried us through the darkest of times. So let's honor the legacy of those who came before us by embracing that same spirit of determination and hope. First up on our edible adventure, the prairie turnip. Now, before you picture a juicy red radish, think again. This root, also known as breadroot, was a staple for Native Americans for centuries, and during the Depression it became a lifeline for many families struggling to put food on the table. These tough little tubers grow wild on the prairies, and while they may not look like much, they're packed with nutrients and energy. Imagine digging these up from the ground, dusting them off and roasting them over an open fire. Folks would eat them raw, roasted, boiled or dried and ground into flour. Some even use them as a coffee substitute. Hey, when you need a caffeine fix, you get creative. The prairie turnip is a testament to the resourcefulness of those who came before us. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unassuming ingredients can be the most nourishing. Next, we've got lamb's quarters, a plant that most folks today would probably call a weed. This plant, often overlooked and underappreciated, has a rich history and a surprising amount of nutritional value. Many people would yank it out of their gardens without a second thought. But during the Great Depression, this leafy green was a welcome sight on dinner plates across the country. Families struggling to make ends meet found solace in this abundant and free source of nutrition. This unassuming plant is actually a nutritional powerhouse packed with vitamins A and C, calcium, iron, and even protein. It's like nature's multivitamin, growing right in your backyard. Lamb's quarters grows like, well, a weed, popping up in fields, gardens, and even sidewalk cracks. Its resilience and ability to thrive in various environments made it a reliable food source during tough times. Free food, don't mind if I do. Families would forage for lamb's quarters, grateful for the nourishment it provided. It was a common sight to see people gathering these greens to bring home to their kitchens. People would use lamb's quarters much like spinach, adding it to soups, stews, and even salads. Its mild flavor made it a versatile ingredient that could be incorporated into a variety of dishes. It could be sautéed with a little garlic and oil, creating a simple yet delicious side dish. The tender leaves would wilt down, absorbing the flavors of the garlic and oil, making for a tasty and nutritious addition to any meal. Or it could be mixed with other foraged greens for a nutritious and filling meal. Combining different wild greens not only added variety to the diet, but also ensured a broader range of nutrients. Some folks even baked it into bread for extra flavor and sustenance. Imagine a loaf of bread with the added nutrition of lamb's quarters, providing a hearty and wholesome food source. So next time you see lamb's quarters sprouting up in your yard, think twice before you toss it on the compost pile. This humble plant has a lot to offer, both in terms of nutrition and culinary potential. You might just be looking at a delicious and nutritious meal. Embrace the history and benefits of lamb's quarters, and you might find yourself adding this so-called weed to your regular diet. Ah, the dandelion, the bane of every perfectly manicured lawn, but a welcome sight for those struggling to put food on the table during the Depression. That's right, even this cheerful yellow weed played a vital role in Depression-era kitchens. Every part of the dandelion is edible, from the sunny yellow flower to the leaves to the roots. The leaves, which have a slightly bitter taste, could be eaten raw in salads, cooked like spinach, or even brewed into a tea. The roots, once roasted, were ground and used as a coffee substitute. And the flowers? Well, those bright yellow petals added a touch of color and sweetness to salads, soups, and even jellies. So the next time you see a dandelion pushing its way through the pavement, take a moment to appreciate its resilience and maybe even its flavor. You might just be surprised at how delicious this humble weed can be.